21 minutes to midnight now. The MP, Andrew Bridgen, has been stripped of his Tory party membership today at the recommendation of a disciplinary panel, and that's after he compared the use of COVID vaccines to the Holocaust. And that comes just days after the Labour MP, Diane Abbott, was suspended from her party for making what Sir Keir Starmer called anti-Semitic remarks, and that was when she suggested Jews do not face racism. And that was weeks after a public conversation about how to discuss the Holocaust was sparked when Gary Lineker was suspended by the BBC. So for tonight's discussion, I've been talking to Jake Wallis-Simons, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and Daniel Sugarman, Director of Public Affairs for the Board of Deputies of British Jews, about why anti-Semitism persists and when it's right to use the term Holocaust as a point of comparison. I began our discussion by asking Daniel for his thoughts on the expulsion of Andrew Bridgen from the Tory party.
I think that it was absolutely the right decision to expel him. I think that the comparison he made was repugnant, and it was absolutely the right thing for the party to have done.
And why do you say that, given that he didn't claim that the Holocaust didn't happen, that 6 million Jews and other minorities did not die? He didn't say that he believe that Israel shouldn't exist or the Jewish people shouldn't have a homeland. Why did you feel that it merited such a prompt and tough action?
The Holocaust was one of the biggest crimes to have happened in world history, and to compare the COVID vaccine rollout to the Holocaust is to suggest that those, I think as he called it, one of the biggest crimes against humanity since the Holocaust, is to suggest that anyone who had a hand in rolling out the COVID vaccine, the government, for instance, or so many of our NHS workers, were part of the biggest crime against humanity. And that is a bizarre and really terrible thing to accuse anyone of. And that's one of the key reasons. But also the idea that he would compare something like the COVID vaccine, which has been a gift to humanity, to one of the worst crimes that have happened in world history is absolutely terrible. And to say, as he did, regarding, calling it one of the biggest crimes against humanity since the Holocaust, it also cheapens the way that people talk about the Holocaust. I think it's, if you cite the Holocaust, if you cite and compare something like this to the Holocaust, it makes a mockery, I believe, of Holocaust memorial.
Let me go to you, Jake Wallis-Simons. How concerned are you that that's what one can deduce from this? It's not necessarily that this man is one of many who genuinely believes that the vaccine rollout is an abomination and should never have been done. It's that increasingly, when people look at what happened to the Jewish people and other minorities, the importance of that is being diminished with time, and not enough is being done to address it.
Yeah, I think there's a real problem with the spread or this tendency to use the Holocaust as a metaphor or a simile to heighten awareness of something else. The Holocaust was a genocide. So if you're taking something that was not a genocide and comparing it to a genocide, there can only be one reason for it, is that you're taking something lesser and trying to exaggerate it. You're appropriating, if you like, the suffering of not just the 6 million victims, but their families and further generations to score political points in Andrew Bridgen's case, and indeed in Gary Lineker's case, in my view. And the first question is, why do it? If what you're talking about is so bad, if the vaccine rollout was so bad, why compare it to the Holocaust? Why take the worst genocide in living memory, certainly in Western Europe, and appropriate that and use it to describe something else?
Well, let me push back. Let me ask you, why do you think that is?
The point of the Holocaust, it is beyond other things. It's just there is a core immorality at taking something that is not as depraved, extensive, horrendous as the Holocaust, and comparing it to the Holocaust in order to amplify your point. I mean, that is clearly appropriating the suffering of millions and millions of people for political ends. The Holocaust, it only just did, it almost succeeded. It wasn't, 6 million people were killed. It changed the Jewish population forever. It wiped out entire communities, traditions. It almost wiped out Jewish heritage, culture, language, humor, scientific discoveries. The entirety of the Jewish people and race and history was almost extinguished. And thank God it wasn't. But to take that and to use it to describe the vaccine rollout or to describe the government's immigration policy, even if you might disagree with it, or anything else, is quite clearly a deeply immoral act.
And Daniel Sugarman from the Board of Deputies, we're having this conversation after 7 decades or more of what you might call Holocaust education, denazification in Germany, of course, but Holocaust education in much of the rest of the industrialized world. What is it about the way this education is being delivered that is not cutting through?
Well, I think that in some areas and in some countries, there just isn't enough Holocaust education, or it's not taught perhaps in a way that is optimal. I think that we see, unfortunately, surveys that come out on a fairly regular basis that talk about people's awareness of the Holocaust, and it seems shockingly low. Now, I don't know why that necessarily is. I think that we're in a really difficult situation at the moment because we have perhaps a decade or two left before we will be without any survivors with us. At the moment, we're incredibly fortunate in that we have survivors of the Holocaust who are among us, who can tell their stories, who we can meet. But age means that that's not going to be the case for that much longer.
Indeed. And another difficulty might be, Jake, that there are some members of minority groups, particularly of the African diaspora, who, when asked to talk about the Holocaust, will sometimes say to you, well, which one? Do you mean the Jewish Holocaust or do you mean the African Holocaust? And isn't one difficulty that when people talk about the Holocaust, they think immediately of what happened to European Jews, and they feel upset or concerned that what happened to the victims of other genocides or other mass murders, terrible things that human beings have done to each other. For example, what happened to African enslaved people from the 16th century onwards is not recognised enough. And as a result, you get the kind of letter that the Labour MP Diane Abbott wrote to the Observer in draft at the weekend.
There can't be a competition for genocides, and I think that the instinct that we've seen that's become fashionable recently to treat the Holocaust as if it was just one of a number of Holocausts, just one of a number of genocides, to sort of universalize the experience as if it's all the same, is again deeply, deeply immoral, because the victims of the Holocaust lost their lives, they lost their physicality, their being in the world, and universalizing their experience as if it was just one amongst others and taking away the particularity of the way of life, the family, the feeling, the traditions, the history, and erasing that through universalization is almost depriving them further of their humanity in death. And I would say that the same thing would apply of any genocide. The Cambodian genocide, for example, in Holocaust Memorial Day commemorates 4 genocides: the Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide, Darfur, and Bosnia. In my view, wrongly, it should only commemorate the Holocaust. There should be other ceremonies to commemorate the others, or don't call it Holocaust Memorial Day, call it Genocide Memorial Day. But either way, the Cambodian Holocaust was a communist utopian project, the Cambodian genocide. It was not the same as the Holocaust. And to ally them together deprives both groups of their uniqueness, their humanity, their history, and their context. And that's why it's wrong to universalize the experience of genocide in this way. Obviously, nobody would say that the experience of black slavery or the various different massacres that have been experienced in India, in Africa, across the colonial areas and elsewhere should be toned down or not recognized or anything like that. What I am saying is that arguing for universalism is not the way forward.
Well, isn't the difficulty with that, Daniel, that members of communities which still feel the very present shadow of what happened, maybe not 80 years ago, but 150 or 200 years ago, they feel that currently in Britain, they're being told, forget this history, don't dig it up, don't ask for reparations, just accept it and move on. And they say, well, you wouldn't dare say that to the descendants of the Holocaust, so why should you say it to us? This is real and it's live, isn't it, Daniel?
I think that there is a real unfortunate situation with regards to people who actively take the Holocaust and take another genocide or another terrible event in human history and try and compare them and try and weigh which one is perhaps more severe or worse than the other. And I think that just, it gets us nowhere. It really does. And I feel, for example, the organization that I work for, the Board of Deputies, strongly supports the planned Holocaust Memorial next to Westminster. And we've also gone on record supporting the building of a national monument to slavery. I think that it's very important that we remember different parts of history. And I think that for the Jewish community, of course, it's incredibly personal to us. And it's important to us that people remember the Holocaust and people don't in any way diminish the Holocaust. But at the same time, I think that we need to work together with other faith groups, with other racial groups, ethnicities, in order to understand the terrible crimes that have been committed in the past against them, and to do what we can to ensure that those crimes are properly understood and properly learned about and properly commemorated.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the collaboration and teamwork and allyship that you saw among Jewish and African groups in South Africa, in the States, and students of history will recognize that, and indeed to a degree in this country, Jake. So just in closing, for those people who want to invoke, quotes, the Holocaust, and who are now concerned about in which context it should do so, given what's happened today, given the way in which Roger Hallam, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, once referred to the Holocaust, given the kinds of the Wild West talk that we see online, what would you suggest?
I would suggest not using it. I think it depends. For a start, the first question is what you're seeking to compare to the Holocaust. If it is a genocide, another genocide, there's a perfectly good word for you to use, which is genocide. If it's slavery, call it slavery. If you're seeking to compare government policy with regard to migration to anything, don't call it the Holocaust because it's not a genocide. If you're seeking to compare the COVID vaccines to something, don't call it the Holocaust because it isn't a genocide and it isn't the Holocaust. Just don't call things that they're not. I mean, using the term Holocaust and applying it liberally, as Daniel said earlier, cheapens the Holocaust so egregiously, and it's astonishing that people cannot see that.
And that was Jake Wallis-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and Daniel Sugarman, Director of Public Affairs at the Board of Deputies for British Jews, about why anti-Semitism persists and about when it's right to refer to the Holocaust.